Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. When I look back now, it feels almost ordinary, the way it all began. Just a simple invitation from my neighbor. But isn't that how life often surprises us? The extraordinary is hidden in the everyday. It was late spring, one of those days when the air is still cool enough to carry a softness, yet warm enough to hint at summer. I had been busy inside all morning, cleaning, folding laundry, putting life in its usual order. When I opened the window, I could hear the hum of a lawn mower a few houses down, the bark of a dog, and the faint music of birds weaving through it all. It made me pause. How often do we forget to just breathe in our surroundings? That's when I heard his voice. My neighbor, Tom. He lived 2 houses over, a widower in his late 60s, quiet, dependable, the kind of man who always waved from across the fence. "Why don't you come sit for a while?" he called out. "I've set up some chairs in the yard. It's a fine day to waste on nothing but air and sunshine." At first, I hesitated. It wasn't something I usually did, drop everything and accept an unplanned invitation. But something about his tone, gentle yet persuasive, made me think twice. Maybe I needed a pause more than I realized. I slipped on my sandals, smoothed down my dress, and stepped outside. The yard was welcoming in its simplicity. A patch of grass dappled with shade from a large oak tree, a pair of chairs angled toward each other, and a small table in between with 2 glasses of lemonade beading with condensation. The smell of freshly cut grass lingered, mingling with the faint sweetness of lilacs from a bush nearby. Tom stood there, his hands in his pockets, a little smile tugging at his mouth like he wasn't sure if I'd really come. "I was beginning to think you changed your mind," he said with a chuckle. "I almost did," I admitted, lowering myself into one of the chairs. "But you're right. It's too nice a day to ignore." For a few minutes, we sat quietly, sipping the lemonade. The ice clinked softly in our glasses. I noticed the small details I never had before. The way the sunlight shifted as the breeze moved the leaves, how his dog, a sleepy old retriever, dozed at his feet, the faint creak of the chair as I leaned back. It was comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't press for words but makes room for them. Eventually, he spoke. "I used to sit out here with my wife all the time," he said, his eyes following a bird as it darted across the yard. "She loved this spot. Said the tree made the best shade." He paused, and for a moment I worried I had stepped into something too personal. But then he turned to me and added, "Funny how we let things go quiet when we lose the people who filled them." His words touched something in me. I felt an ache, not just for him, but for myself too, for the moments I had overlooked, the conversations I had let slip past because I was too busy. "I think we all do that," I said softly. "Hold on to spaces but forget to use them." He looked at me then, really looked, and I realized this wasn't just about the yard. It was about connection, about stepping out of the roles we so often box ourselves into. We spent the next hour talking about small things, gardening, the quirks of our neighborhood, how the seasons had changed. But beneath it, there was something unspoken, a quiet recognition that life is shorter than we think, and sharing it even for an afternoon matters. At one point, he leaned back, his face tilted toward the sky. "You know," he said, "I used to think the best years were behind me. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe the best years are just the ones we choose to notice." That stayed with me. I hadn't expected to hear something so profound in such an ordinary moment. It made me think of my own life, the routines that weighed me down, the years I had spent putting others before myself without realizing how much I had silenced my own needs. As the sun shifted lower, painting the yard in golden light, I realized I didn't want the moment to end. There was no rush, no demand, just 2 people sharing time. And for the first time in a long while, I felt present, as if I had finally remembered how to simply be. When I finally stood to leave, he didn't try to hold me back. He just smiled and said, "There's always a chair waiting here. Don't let it sit empty too long." Walking back to my house, I felt lighter. It was just a neighbor's yard, just an afternoon. But it opened something in me I hadn't known was closed, a reminder that connection doesn't have to be grand to be meaningful. Sometimes, it's in the quiet spaces, under the shade of an old oak tree, that we find the pieces of ourselves we thought were gone that night. as I sat by my window looking out at the fading light, I knew I would return. Not because of obligation, but because something had shifted inside me. And though I couldn't name it yet, I felt the first stirrings of change, the promise that this was only the beginning of a story I hadn't expected to live. The next time I went to Tom's yard, it felt different. That first afternoon had been gentle, almost like a soft warning that life was nudging me toward something I had forgotten, the joy of simply noticing, of letting someone else share the quiet with you. I wasn't expecting anything to change in me so quickly, yet there was a lightness I carried with me as I walked the familiar path between our houses. Tom greeted me with that same easy smile, but this time there was a warmth in his eyes that made me notice the subtle lines at the corners, the way his hair caught the sunlight. "I saved you the shady chair," he said, gesturing toward the oak tree that now seemed to have grown taller overnight, more protective somehow, like it had been waiting for me too. I laughed lightly and sat down, the chair creaking under me. For a moment, we just watched the yard, the gentle sway of branches, the whisper of leaves, the sunlight sprinkling across the grass like dusted gold. The world outside seemed distant, like we had carved out a small, private bubble where only the air and quiet mattered. We began talking again, but this time the conversation had a rhythm I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just polite exchange or the sharing of trivialities. We were peeling back layers carefully, as though discovering something fragile yet worth holding. I told him about my mornings, the routines I followed almost blindly, the way I sometimes felt like I was moving through life on autopilot. He listened, really listened, leaning back and nodding. "I know that feeling," he said softly. "Some days, the world seems to move so fast that it leaves us behind. But moments like this," he waved at the yard around us, "remind us that time isn't only in hours or days. It's in breathing, noticing, feeling." I smiled, struck by how he could articulate something I had only sensed in fleeting flashes. There was a comfort in that, an understanding without judgment. It reminded me that connection could be gentle, slow, and still deeply meaningful. As we sat, the air shifted slightly with a warm breeze carrying the faint scent of honeysuckle. I noticed his dog stretching, the creak of the fence swinging in the wind, a hummingbird darting near the lilacs. Each sound, each movement, seemed amplified, alive. "It's strange how much you notice when you're really present," I murmured. "Exactly," he said. "And the more you notice, the more the world talks back." For a while, we let the conversation drift like that, moving from memories to reflections, from small jokes to quiet pauses that spoke louder than words. There was a tension beneath it, not uncomfortable, but the kind that makes you aware that something important is unfolding, a shift in awareness that doesn't demand attention but still commands it. At one point, he reached over to straighten a fallen branch on the chair next to me. His hand lingered a moment longer than necessary, and I felt a surprising warmth spread through me, not from desire, but from the human closeness of trust and care. It reminded me that intimacy isn't always romantic. Sometimes it's simply being seen and acknowledged without pretense. We began sharing little personal stories, some humorous, some poignant. I learned about his life before he moved into the neighborhood, the small regrets he carried, and the quiet joys he had discovered along the way. In turn, I found myself opening up about my own experiences in a way I hadn't anticipated. I realized that sharing wasn't about seeking advice or validation, it was about being heard and recognizing the reflection of your own experiences in another person's presence. The sun moved lower, the shadows lengthening across the yard, and suddenly the moment felt both timeless and fleeting. I noticed the softness in Tom's eyes, the way his posture relaxed when he thought no one was watching, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For this yard, for this afternoon, for the unexpected depth of a neighbor's invitation. Before leaving, we sat in silence for a while, letting the world quiet itself around us. Then he smiled and said, "You don't have to wait for a perfect day to come by. Life's too short for that." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle gently in my chest. Walking back to my house, I realized I had been holding my breath without knowing it, and now I could exhale fully. Something in me had shifted, not dramatically, not suddenly, but undeniably. That quiet afternoon in his yard had opened a door to reflection, trust, and an understanding of the value of small, intentional moments. That evening, as I sat by my window with a cup of tea, the memory of the yard lingered like a soft melody. I knew I would return, not out of obligation, but because I had glimpsed a version of life I wanted to experience more fully, a life where connection, patience, and presence weren't rare gifts, but everyday treasures waiting to be noticed. It was still just a yard, and just a neighbor. Yet it had become a sanctuary, a space where I was allowed to be myself, completely and without reservation. And in that realization, I found a new kind of freedom, one that would quietly shape the days to come. By the third visit, something in the yard felt familiar and strangely sacred. It was no longer just a place to sit, it had become a pause between the busyness of my life and the quiet I had forgotten to cherish. I approached the familiar path, and even before I saw Tom, I felt the gentle hum of anticipation in the air, a feeling like stepping into a room that had been waiting for me all along. Tom was already outside, tending to a small flower bed near the fence. The morning sunlight caught the silver strands in his hair, giving him a soft glow that made him seem almost younger, yet somehow more grounded. "There you are," he said with that quiet warmth that had become his trademark. "I thought you might need a cup of tea today. I brewed something special." I smiled, a little heartened by the gesture. "You didn't have to, but I'm glad you did." We settled into the chairs under the oak tree. The yard was alive with small movements, the leaves fluttering with a delicate rhythm, a pair of sparrows hopping along the fence, the soft buzz of bees weaving through the blossoms. It was a symphony of ordinary life, yet it felt extraordinary because we were there to witness it together. Tom poured the tea, handing me a cup with careful attention. The aroma of chamomile and a hint of mint rose in the air. I inhaled deeply, noticing how even this simple act of pouring tea could feel like a ritual, a gesture that spoke volumes without needing words. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low and thoughtful, "about how often we let the days slip past, doing what we must but not what we feel. We tell ourselves life is routine, predictable, but really, it's unpredictable at every corner. And yet, we sometimes fail to notice." I nodded, feeling a familiar resonance with his words. "It's true. I've been so focused on getting through each day that I forgot to feel it. To notice the little things, like this, the light through the leaves, the quiet of a shared afternoon, the comfort of conversation without expectation." He smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "Exactly. It's in the noticing that life begins to matter." The conversation drifted then, meandering between reflections on past experiences, observations of the neighborhood, and dreams that felt almost too big to admit aloud. Each topic seemed to open another layer of understanding between us, a gentle unveiling that felt safe because it was built on trust rather than obligation. At one point, a gust of wind brushed through the yard, scattering petals from a nearby bush. I reached instinctively to gather a few, and Tom laughed softly. "It's funny how small gestures can carry meaning," he said. "Sometimes, it's the things we barely notice that stay with us the longest." And I realized he was right. That afternoon, I began noticing the subtle ways his presence affected me, the calm steadiness of his tone, the patience in his listening, the quiet encouragement in the way he allowed me to speak without interruption. It wasn't just comfort, it was a kind of companionship I hadn't expected, one that required no grand gestures but thrived in the quiet. We lingered long into the afternoon. The shadows stretched across the yard as the sun began its slow descent, painting everything in amber and gold. I found myself thinking about the unexpected beauty of these moments, the way simple attention and care could create such a profound sense of connection. Before I knew it, the light was fading, and the air had grown cooler. Tom stood, brushing a speck of dust from his pants. "I guess it's time to let the day end," he said, though there was no urgency in his voice. "But remember, you're always welcome. Even if it's just for a moment, even if it's just to breathe." I rose, feeling a lingering warmth in my chest, a recognition that what we shared in that yard went beyond casual neighborliness. It was a reminder that life's richest experiences often appear unannounced, in quiet spaces and unassuming gestures. Walking back to my house, I carried that warmth with me, like sunlight captured in my hands. I realized the yard had become more than a physical space, it was a mirror for my own reflections, a place where connection, trust, and understanding could flourish without pretense. That night, I sat by my window, replaying the afternoon in my mind. Each detail, the sway of the branches, the scent of the tea, the soft cadence of his voice, was etched into memory. And I understood something essential: life's most meaningful moments aren't always those we plan or chase. Often, they are the ones that find us unexpectedly, in the presence of someone willing to share the quiet and the joy of simply being. And in that realization, I felt a gentle hope, a quiet anticipation that these afternoons would continue, shaping not just my days, but my understanding of life itself. By the fourth visit, I felt as though the yard had become part of me, a secret extension of my own life where time slowed and the world's weight felt lighter. I approached the path with a quiet anticipation, carrying with me the memory of the previous afternoons, each one layering gently upon the other. The sun was higher in the sky than before, but its warmth was tempered by a soft breeze that hinted at summer's arrival. Tom was already outside, kneeling beside the flower beds he had tended carefully over the past weeks. The flowers had grown taller, more vibrant, their colors catching the sunlight in a way that made the yard feel alive with subtle energy. He looked up and smiled, that same gentle, welcoming smile that had become a balm to my spirit. "I wasn't sure if you'd come today," he said, brushing soil from his hands. "But I'm glad you did." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, feeling a calm certainty I hadn't anticipated. We settled into the familiar chairs under the oak tree, the cool shade offering relief from the midday sun. The yard was a symphony of movement, leaves dancing in the breeze, birds flitting through the branches, the soft hum of insects weaving through the flowers. It was a living painting, and we were its quiet observers. This time, the conversation took on a reflective tone. We spoke about change, how it had shaped our lives, both subtly and profoundly. Tom shared stories of challenges he had faced, the losses and lessons that had marked his years, and I found myself sharing moments of my own, times I had doubted myself, opportunities one had overlooked, fears I had quietly carried. Each revelation felt like shedding a layer, a mutual vulnerability that strengthened rather than exposed. He poured us both tea, the aroma of chamomile and mint familiar now, comforting. "You know," he said, "there's a certain courage in being open like this. To show someone who you really are, not just what the world expects you to be." I nodded, feeling a resonance deep in my chest. "It's easier here," I admitted. "In this yard, it feels like I can breathe. Like I'm allowed to be seen without judgment." A comfortable silence followed, filled with the sounds of the yard. It was then I noticed a small detail I hadn't before, a faint engraving on the oak tree, likely carved years ago by someone long gone. It read, "Moments matter." I smiled to myself. How fitting, that a tree could hold a reminder of what we were living in this very moment. We lingered longer than usual, watching the sunlight shift through the branches, the shadows stretching and bending. I realized that my perception of time had changed in this yard. Minutes seemed to expand, allowing space for thought, for feeling, for presence. There was a depth to these afternoons that I had not expected, a sense that the ordinary could be extraordinary if only we allowed ourselves to notice. At one point, Tom reached out to adjust a cushion on the chair beside me, and our hands brushed briefly. It was a small gesture, yet it carried with it an unspoken acknowledgement of trust and shared experience. I felt a warmth spread through me, not from excitement, but from the comfort of knowing someone else truly understood the value of these quiet connections. As the afternoon waned, we spoke about hopes, both realized and deferred. Tom mentioned plans he had once abandoned and how, with patience, he had discovered new passions. I shared my own aspirations, some tentative, some more defined, and found in his listening a genuine encouragement I hadn't anticipated from anyone in years. When it was finally time to leave, I rose with a sense of reluctant gratitude. Tom didn't try to prolong the moment, he simply smiled and said, "The yard will be here. And so will I." Walking back home, I reflected on the journey these visits had taken me on. What began as a simple invitation had grown into a profound experience of presence, understanding, and quiet growth. The yard, the tea, the conversations, they were symbols of something larger. The discovery that life's richness is often found in small, intentional moments shared with another human being. That evening, as I sat by my window, the memory of the yard and our afternoons together unfolded in my mind like a gentle tapestry. I felt a clarity I hadn't known I was missing. Life is not only about accomplishments or routines, but also about noticing, reflecting, and sharing these moments with others who understand the quiet beauty of connection. And in that realization, I understood something deeply comforting and enduring. The yard was more than a place, it was a mirror for my own growth, a sanctuary for reflection, and a testament to the power of kindness, patience, and shared presence. The memory would follow me for years, not because it was dramatic or grand, but because it was authentic, deeply human, and quietly transformative. I carried that lesson with me. knowing that while the world outside could be unpredictable and hurried, there would always be spaces, literal or metaphorical, where one could pause, breathe, and remember what truly matters. And for me, that space had become a yard, a neighbor, and a quiet, enduring connection that reshaped how I experienced the world. The afternoons in that yard reminded me that life's most meaningful moments are not always planned. Often, they arrive softly, unexpectedly, and leave an imprint that lingers far longer than we anticipate, teaching us to see, to feel, and to live more fully with every quiet, shared moment.